In today's video, I thought it would be appropriate for some of my first videos on YouTube for me to do an intro to formulas in Excel. By the end of this video, you're going to have had an introduction to all the things that are critical to understand right at the start when you're beginning to work with formulas in Excel. We're not necessarily going to go into all the vast array of formulas out there because that will be overwhelming, but we're going to come up with a philosophy that's going to help you get through your Excel journey and come to understanding formulas in a lot more of a powerful way that is going to have you feeling a lot more confident and not feeling overwhelmed by the way that a lot of people tend to go into Excel or are introduced to Excel. The key to learning Excel is to have someone who tutors you and teaches you in a way that is really calm, because it's a really powerful tool and it doesn't have to be overwhelming. So this video doesn't get too long. I'm going to split it into two parts. And the first part is just going to be going through the fundamentals of Excel that I want you to learn right at the beginning. And I want to emphasize that I think you want to spend a little bit more time learning the grassroots concepts of Excel. And that's even down the line when it comes to learning more formulas. Because if you grasp the root concepts, the whole vast array of Excel just becomes easier and you don't actually have to learn everything because you have such a great understanding of the fundamentals. The second part of this video, and if it gets too long, I'm going to put it into a playlist so you can just click on it and move on to the next one, because I don't want you to get to a video that's 30 minutes long and you feel like it's too much. But the second part, we're just going to go into some useful functionalities of formula and further that understanding a little bit more. And just so you know who you're learning from, I am an ex-corporate finance professional. I worked for a lot of the biggest accountancy firms in the world for a number of years. And I have based my career in Excel for 15 plus years. So you're learning from someone who knows how to use the tool, but also more importantly, knows that you don't have to know everything about the tool to be one of the best people using these tools, which I have been in the teams I've worked in. There's a Pareto principle I really want to get you to understand and appreciate right now, which is the 20 to 80 ratio rule. And what that means is you can really get far by learning 20% of the most powerful tools that give you 80% of the result. And I would say for Excel, that's really true. There are hundreds of formulas in Excel, and I can tell you the good news is I only use perhaps 20 or even less of them repeatedly, but really, really well. Let's dive straight into this video so you can start to learn a little bit about Excel, and we're going to get to my philosophy later on. If you want to hear a little bit more about me and things I've got coming up to support you in your Excel journey, then please go to my website, sign up to the newsletter, and when I begin to release announcements and potentially online practice sessions where you can interact with me and have me there to help, you'll be the first to know. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about when it comes to Excel formulas is just how to access them. So diving into this, I assume you know a little bit about Excel and what the software is, but just a really quick overview. In terms of Excel, you have this ribbon at the top, which we're not going into this video because we're not doing a tutorial in how to use Excel. So I'm going to hide it for now, so we don't get too confused. You've got this other area here, which is called the formula ribbon or the formulas tab, where you can use formulas. When you type in a cell, it also gets replicated up here. So you can type either directly into a cell or you can type up here as well. Now, this is an introduction to formulas, and the first thing you need to know is how do you put a formula into a cell, or maybe the first thing you actually need to know is what is a formula. So a formula is effectively something you can use in Excel where you have to put inputs in, you have informations that go into something, and then it will give you a useful sort of output. And the most simplistic version of this we can think of, and you're now going to see the first way that you can actually begin to start entering a formula into Excel, is to press the equal sign when you are in a cell in Excel. By pressing the equal sign, we're going to do one of the most simple formulas you can to start, and that's to do 1 plus 1. And what I want to demonstrate here, I know all of you can do this, is the fact that the inputs are 1 and 1, and the function is the plus to add them together. When I hit enter, you get the result, which is 2. And the reason I want to sort of summarize it like this is because if you understand it in its most simplest form, trust me guys, you're going to understand this when it gets way more complex. So understanding here that the inputs are 1 and the function is plus. Now I showed you one way of putting a formula into Excel, and that's to hit the equal sign, and I'm just going to show you this really quickly. But as you begin to type, let's say I was looking for the sum function, which we're going to talk about really shortly, a really common one. It's going to come up with a whole bunch and suggest to me what it thinks I'm looking for. That's always useful. And that also means you don't have to memorize every single function that you think there is in Excel. Maybe you just have to memorize the first few letters. The other thing is I don't know what half of these functions do on the screen, and I've worked in Excel for 15 plus years, so just don't worry about it. The functions you need to learn, you're going to come across them and you'll memorize them. There's no need to learn every formula that you come across because they're probably just not going to be useful to you. The other way that you can get a formula into Excel is by simply clicking this function here, fx, and f actually stands for function, and x is effectively your inputs. When you click that button, you get this useful dialog box. So this is the second way that you can enter a formula in Excel. In the beginning, this can be really useful because it opens up a dialog box where you can get a little bit more help. As you progress in your journey to using Excel, you'll use this less and less. And I can say I honestly haven't seen this dialog box for years just because I don't use it at all. But in the beginning, it's a really useful tool, and you can also search for things you may have heard of. And you may have heard of an if formula, so you may type it into this box and hit enter, and it comes up with a whole bunch of suggestions, not just an if, but different types of ifs. So you can use it to find a function. The thing I want to help you to use this here is actually, I just want to find a sum function, because we're going to do this really simply to start. So a sum function is similar to adding up, and what I can do if I'm using the dialog box is to double click or hit OK on the sum function. Again, a useful part of this dialog box is that it then prompts you to put the inputs into the function, and this wouldn't be how I would manually type them in if I was using it directly in the cell, which I'm going to show you after this. But this is useful because it tells you what to do. So it wants a number because this function, the sum function, is simply going to add these numbers up. So what I can do in here is to click on this arrow button here, and it tells me it wants a number. I can go and click on 10, and I can then click back here, and it's popped B13, which is the cell reference. It's B13 into that box. I can then go and find this function here, or that cell, and here we go. It's added another row for me here because I can keep growing. I can then click OK, and there you go. And I've got my first formula, and I know it's simplistic, but we've just got started. So this function is adding up 10 and 20. You can see the cell references in this formula here, and very usefully, when you click into a formula, it actually highlights the cell you're looking for that are being used as inputs in the formula if they're on the same sheet. Like I said, guys, if you want to keep up with me and updates for things coming in the future, go and sign up to my newsletter where you will hear announcements. And if I run practice sessions in the future, you can join them to practice your Excel skills while I'll be online and I'll be answering questions. So this is a really good way to kind of visualize what's going into your formula. I'm just going to delete this, and then I'm going to just type it in the same thing. So if I wanted to do this without using the dialog box, let's say I know exactly what I'm looking for, I would write sum. And then there's some useful symbols I want to talk about when it comes to formula. When you put a function or a formula in, so here sum is going to be the formula, you always have to tell Excel where you're about to start putting the inputs in for the formula, and that's with an open bracket. So I've got my open bracket. I now need to put in a number, and Excel is prompting me to put in a number. You can see it here. Rather than in the dialog box, it's actually given me a nice, much cleaner version of what I need to be doing. So here I can do that. You actually split your inputs when you're typing a formula with commas. So as soon as I hit a comma, it knows I've finished telling it my first input. I'm now going to tell it my second input. And that's 20. I'm then going to close the bracket, which tells Excel I've finished putting in my inputs. I'm going to hit enter, and I've got the same answer. So if we just scroll over here, I've said there's a few symbols I want to talk through. We've covered equals, we've covered the bracket, we've covered the comma. The other thing in Excel, especially when you're writing formulas, is to type equals. And then if you want Excel to do some maths, then you would just type that in, or you would start with a formula. If you want to enter, let's say, text into a formula for other reasons you're going to see when you develop your knowledge of other formulas, which we'll get into the second part of this video and use actually. And if you want to put text into a formula, you use quotation marks. And what Excel will do here is it will ignore basically anything that's put between those quotation marks and just take it as text and display it. So if I enter it now, it's the same as if I had just typed text into a cell. Right now, obviously, you wouldn't do that just to put text into a cell, but it's going to be useful when you come up with new ideas and start to develop your use of formulas. The final one is when you're using formulas, and again, this may come in useful in a specific context, is if you're using something like text. So if I'm typing here, I'll type text or test, let's say, and then you can use this thing called an ampersand, and this will just add two different text strings together. And this has uses. Right now, I'm just showing you something that you may use in the future. And I might just say testing update. And there you go, it's put it together. And actually I've made a bit of a mistake. Maybe I want a space. So I've put a space in and it goes test update. So now we've covered all the symbols I think that are useful. There's actually one more. So the last one is, you'll see when I'm in this cell that I've put this hyphen at the start. And that's because if I type equals into a cell and I just put something in, it's going to come up with an error because whenever I type equals, Excel wants me to put a formula in. And if it's not a formula and it doesn't recognize it, it will come up with a name, or come up with an NA, or come up with an error. Sometimes I just want to type into an Excel cell and for it to display exactly what I put in. And most of the time with text it does that, but it doesn't always when you're putting in dates. So sometimes you can put in this hyphen if you need to, because Excel for some reason isn't displaying your input the way that you type it into the cell. And then after that hyphen, you can type anything you want in. So if I type in a formula, now that I've used the hyphen and just put sum 1 and put in the other input of 1, it actually won't give me an output. It will literally display what I typed in after the hyphen. And that's really useful and will come in useful at points in the future. So here I've come up with a small table of just numbers. And if I wanted to add this up, I could do what I started doing earlier, which was to go equals sum. And one thing I'm going to do actually for you guys here is to switch on my keystroke. So you can actually now see the keys that I'm pressing. So I hit equals, I then type in my formula. I then can, using arrows, just navigate up, or you can use the mouse and click. And I use comma, and this is a way to start practicing which is going to make your formula process much easier. Just using the keyboard, using commas, it's way better. So I could do this the long way, which is literally to pick all of the cells, and this is going to take ages, and Excel is not going to be that efficient. Another way to do this is to use sum and use a range, what we call a range of cells. I can go up to the top, I can either use my mouse and click and hold and drag this down, and as you can see, it's picking the range. So it's picked that whole range, the starting cell and the ending cell, and it includes everything in between. How I would do this without using the mouse, which I think you should, and I suggest you get used to, is to come to the top cell. Actually, let's do this from the start. So I equals sum, I open a bracket, and then I press the up arrow, and then I'm going to go all the way up to the top. I'm going to hit shift on my keyboard and hold it. I'm going to drag it all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to hit enter, and I've got my sum. Honestly, these little tips, these little skills are going to make you the most efficient person in Excel going forward. So just try and get away from using your mouse. These things, even if a little bit difficult at the start, are going to pay off massively and in the future. Final tip I'm going to give you here, and just another little tip, and this is a shortcut, and subscribe because I'm going to do way more videos on shortcuts in the future, just not here because I don't want to overwhelm you, but this is a really useful one. I learned this about 5 or 10 years into my career, which is slightly embarrassing, but it doesn't save that much time, but it's nice to know anyways. If you're close to a column or a row of numbers and you hit on your keyboard Alt and plus, or the equal sign, it's the same key, it's automatically going to guess the range that you want, and I can just simply hit enter after that. Doesn't always work depending on the numbers around it, but it's quite useful and can be quite speedy. The other elements of basic arithmetic we're just going to do as an example, so let's just quickly populate some numbers. Plus we've done, so if we just want to use this, we may just do it manually really quickly. Minus, we can go equals, let's go 7. Actually, let's generate a minus number, so let's go minus, let's go 2, minus 7. So you've then got a subtraction, you've then got your star sign, that's going to give you multiplication, so equals 3, star sign in between, 8, that does the multiplication for me. We can go equals 9, then forward slash We'll do a division. That's done. 9 divided by 4 is 2.25. This one is to the power of. So if you wanted, which we hardly ever do, but to be honest, when we're doing interest rate calculations and compounding, you may want this. We can do 5. Well, let's do the other way around, otherwise it's going to be a really big number. 5, 10 to the power of 5. And there you go. We've got nice, what we'd expect. So just to recap, we've gone over the useful symbols that you need to know when using formulas. You need to understand that equals and then the formula name comes first. You then use an open bracket to open where you're about to start putting in inputs. You use commas to separate your inputs. And the formulas are going to get more complicated and way more useful. This gives you a fundamental base of how to start using these things and how the language of formulas actually works. In the second part, we're going to look at dates. We're going to look at nested formulas. We're going to finally look at range, relative cell references, and how it's dynamic in Excel, how that can be useful and how you can stop it. Like I said, guys, if you want to keep up with me and updates for things coming in the future, go and sign up to my newsletter where you'll hear announcements. And if I run practice sessions in the future, you can join them to practice your Excel skills while I'll be online and I'll be answering questions. Now,